Hello, and a very warm welcome to Cultural Communication Confidence, the podcast. And welcome to episode 4, where we're going to be talking about global team communication that flows. Now, maybe you're a global team leader and you've noticed that you sometimes have meetings where you're just hearing the same voices over and over again, but not everybody is contributing fully. Or maybe you're working in the team and you really feel like, that communication isn't really happening well, that often you end up coming out the meeting not very clear about what the next steps are. And perhaps there are frustrations between members of the team about what's going on in these meetings. Perhaps it feels like a big waste of time and it actually can lead to delays that really impact your projects. This is clearly not an ideal situation. So in today's episode, I'll talk in a bit of detail about why these challenges come up, the common myths that I often hear from people about global team working and how it should work, and we'll be busting some of those myths. And then I'll talk really specifically about what you can do about this. I'm going to introduce the idea of the communication charter and some dynamics that might go into that. So let's get started and start with the obstacles. Why does this come up? Well, multicultural, multilingual teams are often based in many different locations around the world. And there are, situations where people appear to be operating in English at a very high level. And certainly if English is your first language, we sort of are not aware of this. We kind of assume everybody can communicate to that same level. But the reality can be really different. And I know that when I speak to my individual clients and my corporate clients, there are some challenges around certain aspects of meetings. Sometimes it's about the pace. The speed of the conversation and discussion is too fast to allow everybody to fully contribute. It might be also that certain speakers are using expressions or idioms. They might use humor or refer to something culturally that just isn't in the awareness of everybody around the room. So that makes it difficult for everybody to feel included in the conversation, even if the intention of the speaker was to help relax everybody and make everybody feel kind of part of the conversation. I've also really noticed that in some situations, people just don't feel very comfortable about just unmuting and contributing, which tends to be the most common way that people are invited to share their views and opinions. And that could be for a number of reasons. It could be for cultural dynamics. For example, in the culture that they are based in, actually, it is much more normal to wait for more senior members of the team to contribute first, and then perhaps to not necessarily contribute in the spoken word, but perhaps by writing your thoughts down. So there are lots of obstacles that come up, and we may not be aware of these obstacles until we fully explore them. And part of, the challenges we have as well is that there are several myths out there about, why global teams or how global teams should work. So the first myth that I often hear is that I mentioned this idea that everybody communicates in English, so everybody should be able to communicate to the same level. And there's just a reality, which is even if somebody appears to be fluent in English or able to operate almost every day in it, it doesn't necessarily make them a skilled communicator. And they may not be able to fully express their ideas in the way that they want to. The other myth that I often hear is we live in a globalized world. So, jumping on a call with people from different countries, we should all be able to operate and communicate clearly because we all know how to operate in an international environment. And again, that isn't necessarily true. I've already touched on cultural dynamics today, and these are very important to understand, to be aware of, if we really want to make sure that everybody can contribute in the way that feels comfortable to them. And then finally, the final myth that I often hear is that we all work for the same company, so we sort of know how to operate. We have our ways of doing things that are clear to us. And that may be true. I'm absolutely worked with many different companies and also worked in companies myself in my previous career where the company culture was very clear. However, I would caution this and say that, it's not just about company culture, but you will probably notice that there are cultures that are associated with different departments. For example, the sales department, the marketing department, finance, R&D. And there are cultures that go on within teams as well, microcultures. And that can impact how people interact with each other and how they communicate. So now we've busted those myths and we can really understand some of those challenges. The question is what do we do about this? So I now want to introduce this idea of the communication charter, which, to be honest with, is not my own, but I think it's such a great idea. I really wanted to share this here today. So some of you may have heard of this, but the idea is that you create a written document that summarizes how is it you want to run meetings as a team. Now, although that may sound like that's quite a lot of detail to get into, actually this can be very quickly put together in a meeting together with everyone, as long as we understand some of the challenges and obstacles that people have. And so, what I want to talk about is what could go into this charter. Because, of course, it really is up to you and the team what it is that you want to agree on. But I'm going to give you some good ideas, some best practice around certain aspects of the meeting to consider and to think about whether this would make the impact to reduce frustrations and make your communication flow in the meetings themselves. So, first of all, let's talk about before the meeting, the planning stages. So there are a number of different aspects that we can think about here. First of all, I really want to challenge you and to ask, do you need a meeting? So I find that depending on the company, some companies absolutely love to get together and have a meeting, but it's not always the most efficient way for communication to flow. So really consider, are there some other ways for you to share information or to communicate with each other? It could be, instead of holding a meeting, it would be better for you to have something called asynchronous communication. This means that maybe you communicate, for example, via email. It could be via video messages, such as creating little videos that you then send and somebody replies by video. Or it could be using a platform such as Slack or Trello, something where people are contributing at different points in time, but the communication can still flow. So really think about that. Do you actually need a meeting? Then think about, if you do need a meeting, how much time do you need? So I think that a lot of calendars default to 1 hour, but maybe challenge yourself and think, how much time do you need for a meeting? Is it half an hour, 45 minutes, even 15 minutes if you're really, really focused? So think about the timing. Next, it's who. Who do we actually need in the meeting? Too often, I find that too many people end up in meetings. Everybody gets invited just for information, particularly when it comes to senior managers and leaders. But the reality is, we should challenge that and think about who are the most important people that need to be there and who can be informed or updated afterwards. Now, virtual meeting or hybrid. This is really tricky. I know for many companies still today. It's a challenge to know, what is the best way to do this, particularly if we're thinking about making communication flow or helping communication flow for multilingual and multicultural teams. My view on this, and there are different views out there, is that it's really important to create an equal experience for everybody. So what I mean by this is that I think it is that important that if you're going to have a hybrid meeting, that actually everybody joins virtually so that there's an equal feeling. So if you're in the office, you join virtually as well. I think the problem with hybrid meetings is that the people virtually often get forgotten, and it's hard to get away from that. So I think it's much better to create an equal experience if possible. Once you've got that clear, think about your objectives. I would really also challenge here and say, what are your top 3 objectives? So that if you run out of time, if you have to really focus in on a couple of discussion points, that you're not trying to achieve too much, and make sure that's shared with everybody who's attending the meeting so everybody's clear. And then finally, in the preparation stages, make sure you share anything that needs to be pre-read so people can come prepared, and that you have somebody allocated who's going to take notes and perhaps share some notes after the meeting. It sounds a little bit old school, but it's really important to make sure that the important ideas or areas that have been agreed are shared afterwards. So let's talk about now during the meeting. Now, clearly you want to make this a safe space that everybody feels comfortable to contribute. So I'm going to refer back to something I spoke about previously around challenges. So remember that not everybody feels that comfortable just unmuting and sharing their view. So think about this. What other creative ways could you get people to contribute? It could be as simple as writing their comments in the chat. Maybe you need to think about creating smaller breakout rooms at different points so people feel more comfortable speaking up. It could be that you use other tools like Mentimeter or Klaxon, which create, people can contribute their views anonymously via polls, word clouds. Whatever you use, the idea is really that you have that opportunity to hear everybody's voice rather than hearing the most confident, loudest voices every single time. The final thing I do always recommend at the end of a meeting is to check in. How does everybody feel? And that could be as simple as asking people to put an emoji into the chat. I think it's quite interesting to kind of get a temperature check before you finish your meetings. And then after meetings, well, absolutely, you need to make sure you get those notes out. If whoever was writing up the notes about what's been agreed and the actions, really aim to get these out within 24 to 48 hours, just so that it's fresh in everybody's memories and everybody can prioritize those actions before the next meeting. The only other thing I would suggest you do after a meeting is that if there were certain people who you felt weren't necessarily contributing as much, were being quiet that day, perhaps do just an individual check-in just to make sure they're okay, that they felt like they had their chance for their views to be heard. You might find that they're more comfortable to contribute in this way. So there you go. Some ideas about what could go into your communication charter. I've shared quite a lot here today, and there's quite a lot of different aspects to think about. But hopefully, if you've been listening to this, you'll know which ones are the most important ones for you and need to be agreed within your team about how you're going to interact and communicate during the meetings. The key thing is to monitor how you're doing and see how progress is going. So once you have your communication charter set up, you can clearly do check-ins. I would suggest about every 3 to 6 months to see, how you're doing with implementing the concepts around the communication charter, and then get anonymous feedback from people and see how they're feeling. I think you'll probably notice very quickly yourself if communication is flowing better, if your meetings are going more smoothly, and it feels like you're getting a lot more done through those meetings. So there we go. I really hope this has been really interesting for you, and hopefully very thought-provoking around some ideas that you can take away straight away and think about how to action into your team. I'd be really interested to hear if this is something that you've experienced and noticed in your own team. What particularly have you heard today that you think would be helpful to your team? What particular areas you feel like are not working so smoothly? I would love to know. So please do reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn. My profile is Victoria Reynoldson, and that's spelt Rennolds. SOM. And also, just to let you know that I run team workshops around global team communication. So if this is an area that you, as the leader of a team or somebody who's actually very actively contributing within a multilingual and multicultural team, and you're experiencing some of these challenges, then please do reach out to me to learn more about my team workshops for teams and communication. And I can share more details on that. But finally, in the meantime, this brings us to the end of this episode 4. Thank you so much for joining me. And as ever, I would really love it if you're enjoying these episodes and you're getting really valuable tips from them, then please do subscribe to them so that you can make sure you receive every single episode. And of course, I'd absolutely love it if you could rate and review the show so that I can make sure as many people as possible can hear this. But thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a real pleasure to have you here for this episode, and I look forward to seeing you next time.